Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal Podcast. Our guest today is Greg Irwin. Greg is a co-founder of BWG Global. I've known Greg for a long time, but Greg, I'll let you introduce yourself, you and the company, and then we can roll into the topic. Yeah, but thanks for taking the time to chat today.
Yeah, this is going to be fun because Krish, you've been part of my community and discussion groups, and I'm used to moderating. It's a little different for the microphone to be turned around to me, but I appreciate very much the opportunity to speak with you. Yeah, I'm co-founder of BWG Global. We are a fundamental research service for institutional investors. Let me tell you just a little bit about myself, how I got here, and then a little bit about BWG Global. And please, Krish, guide me however, wherever to make sure that we're, touching on points that you think will be valuable for your listeners.
Absolutely. Yep.
So, look, I was trained as an engineer. I spent time in electrical engineering, and then I found software development. And then coming right out of school, I realized how much more money you can make in finance compared to software development. I was talking to a friend of mine who's on Wall Street, and I think he was making twice my salary. And I was like, what am I doing here? Oh my gosh. So this is back in early 90s. I got a job with Smith Barney, which had a burgeoning, investments group, and they just hired a whole bunch of Morgan Stanley bankers. And I was actually started out on the energy team. Following exploration and production. Anyway, after a year or two, Smith Barney got bought by Salomon Brothers and became Salomon Smith Barney. And not too long after that, merged into Citigroup, which is obviously a brand. Citi is something we all know. So I was there doing investment banking. I transferred over to technology, which was my favorite space, and I worked there for about 10 years. And Lucent was one of my clients. And at the time, we were advising them on spinning off their businesses there in the late 90s now. And I found a role with Avaya, which was their enterprise telephone business. And that was a $6 billion business. They really were, one of the originators of VoIP. And at the time, they were a pretty interesting company. And they didn't have a corporate development, an M&A group, a strategy group. So I went over as one of the heads of that. And we had a great run, 9 years. Actually, the beginning of it was great. It got a little long in the tooth, to be honest, after a couple of years. But I went over and after 5 years of M&A and strategy, I went over as one of the guys helping the product management team. That's kind of where I really learned how to build product, how to market product, how to sell, two-tier distribution, going from basically a waterfall development process to an agile process, and the escalation calls you get at midnight to support somebody with a down system, all that fun stuff. So I was there at Avaya for about 9 years. Then I decided to try something out on my own, and I raised some money, and we built a SaaS business. This was PowerPoint Online before, M365 was a thing, and built a nice product, but not a great business. Hard to sell PowerPoint when everyone's getting it for free, effectively. So that business we wound down, and then found our way to BWG, which really was a nice combination of technology and finance. So back to BWG. What BWG does is we basically pick up fundamental signals from customers and partners as a research input for institutional investors. So if you're a firm like Fidelity, you obviously get information from the companies themselves. They all report quarterly earnings and they take management meetings. And then also there's the sell side of Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs, and they publish their sell side research. But if you're an investor that's really responsible for hundreds of millions of dollars of investments, you need more insight. And that's what we try to provide. by going directly to customers, partners, to basically track how a company is really doing from their key constituents. So we've been doing that now for 13 years. We're a company of 100 120 or so people, following not just technology. We have teams in media and in consumer, and teams out in Taiwan and in Germany doing semiconductor and other sectors. Yeah, so that's a little bit on my background, and that's a little bit about BWG and who we are and what we're doing.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Greg. Before we get into the topic, I want to just share with my audience, our audience, my knowledge of you, your business, and mostly you and the conversations I've had the pleasure of having on the call. So, folks, I don't know how long, but I've been on a lot of calls that Greg and Greg's team have organized for many years now, and I truly enjoy those conversations. So, I'm probably not going to do justice trying to remember everything that's happened, because I've been in many of those calls, but I'm going to say that if you enjoy learning about engineering, talking to people you may or may not know, mostly don't know, because a lot of times I'm in calls with people I don't know them, but just learning from people who are in the industry, doing that on a daily basis, hands-on or otherwise, from a management standpoint, I think it's very, very enjoyable. I know I can't remember the first time I was on the call, Greg. You do a phenomenal job, right? The next 45 minutes or 50 minutes is going to be a great challenge for me for many reasons. One is, this is Greg's domain, right? You do a phenomenal job moderating and getting thoughts and ideas from like 15 different people in a 60-minute window. I'm at the other end of the spectrum, right? An absolute amateur. So you're going to have to bear with me here through all my silly mistakes for the next 45 minutes, but truly appreciate you taking the time. But I'm just going to tell people, for folks who enjoy engineering, truly have a passion for engineering, right? I mean, sometimes you do it because you got to do it, but most times, hopefully, you do it because you want to do it. And if you're like me, I don't have any other skills, so I honestly don't even have a choice, right? This is all I could possibly even do, right? You get on these calls, and Greg moderates them, and other people on Greg's team moderates the calls. A lot of people chime in. They have their comments about feedback and questions and whatnot, and it's very professional. It's very nice, and I've never left a call not actually learning something, right? Yeah, never the case, right? Never the case. So I think I highly recommend, if you provide value, and if you're in Greg's network and whatnot, definitely check out BWG Global.
So folks, you can just go to BWG Global right on our page if you're interested in joining any of these topics. We absolutely want to expand the network. And, it's interesting because, Krish, again, we spend our lives doing this stuff, right? And, I find most people in the community really just intellectually curious. And, it's such an amazing time for technology. Change is happening so fast, and we're doing things that we couldn't fathom. That I think most people really do have a genuine desire to figure out, what's happening.
Yep.
And yeah, you may build, an app on a NoSQL platform, and it might serve a specific role for you. But at the back of your mind, you're definitely thinking, how's MongoDB doing? Or, all right, I'm spending more time here with Cosmos or Dynamo. Is Mongo in trouble? Or, you know what? I'm looking at all this data I'm now pushing into Vector. Is Vector really going to be like, a primary data platform? And what does that mean for, your typical SQL and structured data, NoSQL? And, I think it's just really fun to follow the transformations that are happening here in terms of tech architecture. So, and that's what we do. So we bring people together who are doing it. And what I actually always find is we don't know, right? So we bring together a group of senior manager, director level engineers who are all trying to figure this out, right? Should I, how should I structure this AI application? And everyone's coming to the call to hear from others to see what they're doing. But what I think people don't give themselves enough credit for is the group that's coming to ask the question, that's the group that's figuring it out. It's not their
Right.
managers who come down and just say, hey, the right way to do it is API calls over OpenAI or whatever. It's the group that's truly intellectually curious that is the group that ultimately determines, the new way, the right way, or I'd say the current wave of adoption. And so yeah, I find it fascinating. I love it. I was a guest. The way I was a co-founder. The way I got there was I was a startup founder, and a buddy of mine was at YouTube, and he said, "Come to this thing." And it was my partner, my to-be business partner, who was hosting a group talking about over-the-top streaming back in 2013. And it was just a group of curious people talking about the trends and kind of getting a hint that this thing was much more scalable and the economics were a whole lot better. And, maybe it really does have a chance of blocking, the broadcast monopoly that was in place. And obviously, we see how that's played out over the last 10 years. And so it's actually, there are a couple of things I want to talk about. First, come to BWG, join one of these sessions. I think you'll find it interesting. Well, beyond just the learning, though, I want to just say what I really have loved about it is these relationships. Chris, you and I, like we've known each other for years. People find jobs. People hire team members. We've had companies that have merged because they met through these forums. It comes down to people and relationships. And so I am really probably most proud of that aspect of what it kind of brings to the community.
Amazing.
So
sorry, go ahead.
Please.
Now, I was just going to add a couple of things, right? I'm going to connect my machine. I forgot to power it. Give me 1 second. Okay. Yep. I was going to say, different people, ultimately you come, you contribute, you learn, right? Simple. But how it happens is where I think it's interesting, because for me, when I'm at work discussing a technical topic, it's very unlikely, unless I'm under the weather or something like that, Greg, it's very difficult for me to not be animated, right? I get animated about every conversation. It doesn't have to be polarizing at all. It's just my nature as a person. One of the things I do enjoy on the call is it gives me the 1 hour to actually be quiet for most of the time, right? You get to talk when you're asked to talk, essentially, right? Which is great. And then when you do, you have your opinions, you share it, and then it's a very amicable sort of conversation. To me, it's a break from my regular engineering routine, where if somebody says something, it's hardly ever the case that I'm immediately in agreement or vice versa, right? So that to me was a break from the routine. So I enjoyed that part of it as well. But so that's a great introduction. So I want to jump into the number of things we want to talk about today. The first thing is, I'm going to make a number of assumptions along the way, Greg, so please feel free to correct me. Don't hesitate to interrupt me as I go here, because sometimes brevity is not my forte, as you very well know. So it takes a lot more words than I would probably need. So the thing I want to ask you, the first thing is, so you're an organization that, brings very smart people and people like me as well, but generally smart people to the conversations, talk about different topics, right? You mentioned vector, you mentioned Mongo, you mentioned different things, SaaS and apps, and you pick a topic and people talk about it. So the logistics of, again, to the extent that you're able to share, things you cannot share, I totally appreciate that. I want to understand, we were going to talk about BWG and then closely follow that up with the impact of AI on things that you're doing, essentially. One of my first questions is the whole logistics of being able to identify a topic of interest that's current, right, with what's happening out there in the world that people are interested in learning about. You have clients probably give you needs. I'm assuming, I don't exactly know how it works, but let's say the client tells you, hey, Greg, here's what I want to learn about. And then you go find out, or you find out and the client's willing to purchase that. But you then have to go find people who are qualified to having those conversations, who actually are in the business of doing it, but not just in the business of doing it. I know a lot of fantastic developers. I've worked with them all my life, Greg. They can build great software, but you couldn't pay them to talk, right? It's just that they're not extroverts. It just doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
I'm one of those few people I know myself who likes to code and to talk, enough of both of those things, right?
Yeah.
How do you find, I want to understand the logistics of you identifying the topic, the client, the people, finding if they are a good fit to having those conversations, because hey, I could know everything about Mongo, but if I didn't speak English, then it's no good, because these calls happen to be in English for the most part, right? So
Yeah.
how did it work, and how, to the extent that you can share, how does it work, and how do you see AI and things happening? There's multiple ways I can see AI play a role in your business and the way it might impact it. But I want to know from the organizing of a conversation, of a call, because it's kind of sort of behind the scenes, right? And people take it for granted. And when I set up these podcasts, you publish the podcast and everyone's like, yeah, how difficult is it to get somebody to come to a call and record it and publish it? But when you do it, and you do it frequently enough, and you have to come up with a scalable model, we know how much time and effort it
Oh
takes
yeah.
us. So
Yeah.
I want to understand how you've generally done things, and how you see it change, or it has already begun to change in terms of the organizing of this whole activity.
Sure. First off, it's not easy. Um, I think that there's a lot to be said for just jump in and do it. Don't worry about perfect. That matters a lot. But in terms of how we do it, it starts with a kernel. It starts with somebody, a relationship. And, you always want to be around people that are smart or smarter than yourself. So we find that if you can find that person, whoever it is, and you may have listened to my sessions enough to know who perhaps some of those people are, you hang on to them with two hands and build the relationship and make sure that you're valuable to them. And if you have those people in, others come, others show up. Also, we really ascribe to this idea of like the micro community. So you're right. It's not so easy to find NoSQL experts who want to just get on a group call and talk about um, the uh, the evolution of the space. But once you find one person and then a couple of people who want to listen in, you can put together these kind of self-reinforcing communities of people who do respect each other. And you just being in the role of bringing them together is enough value. Of course, those groups often do collapse if you look around and you don't have a lot of people who are really considered high caliber, real contributors. The groups disintegrate, just fall on the wayside, and that's okay because we keep at it. I'll tell you, one of my favorite groups is we follow lots of different industries, including uh, guns, gun manufacturers, ammunition. A very, it's an interesting niche. And you know what? There isn't much of a business community around gun range owners and gun shop owners. Forget about politics. I mean, put that to the side. Just if you own a gun range, you care about that business the way anybody cares about a business. What is consumer demand like? What's pricing like? What's inventory like? What kind of promotional activity is there? So one of our successful little micro communities is this group of gun range owners and operators. It's probably a group of 30 people. And Krish, it is so once you have the kernel of the group, it is super easy to get them back together anytime. About once a month, you just shoot them all a note and say, hey, everybody, we're going to get together on Thursday. And obviously, only some can make it. But those that do, we have critical mass. And we always have an interesting conversation about what's happening in the business of gun sales and running and operating a gun range, which, again, put politics to the side of whether you're pro-gun or anti-gun. Just here's a business community that has a real need to learn from each other, to understand, what younger consumers are coming up, or what ammunition prices are starting to tank. So don't buy inventory right now. It's very tactical, and for this group of people, very very valuable. So how do we do it? Well, first step is just getting out there and doing it. Second, find the key influencers that you build a community around. And then third, once you have that community, you let it roll. And you keep coming up with interesting topics. You keep supporting people who are part of it. And I'll tell you one other of our tactics here is, if you have a lot of people who are you know maybe in the infrastructure side, bring some people in who are on the system side. Bring somebody in who's an outsourcer. Bring somebody in who's a startup. Bring somebody in who's just enterprise. And they really do like hearing from others who are well informed in different aspects of their topic. So finding those alternative perspectives is really helpful to creating a successful micro community.
That's a great example there. I have a few questions. But you said shoot them a note to the gun owners. I assume pun intended there, Greg.
Yes, sir.
so, so that's a great example, because I've only been to engineering conversations. Honestly, now that you mention, as somebody who doesn't own a gun or has never touched one in my life, I'm still curious to be in one of those conversations. You know what I mean? Just to hear sort of the thoughts from the other side of the world, if you will, right? Because it
Yes.
broadens your horizons, and you become less opinionated about things that you might already have strong opinions about, right? We live in a world where people have opinions about just about everything, and it's just getting stronger and stronger. So the more we learn about things that we know less about, the better off we are, right? And I do that from an engineering standpoint. A lot of times when we pick tools for what we're building next, Greg, I think I've shared this with you, we do not ascribe to the idea where we go with things that we've used in the past, right? Now, let's say we have 8 APIs on AWS Marketplace. Creating the ninth one for a different thing that we're starting to build, I should say, would be a lot easier if we did it very similarly from a stack standpoint to the previous 8. But we don't do it like that. We look at the problem as though it is unique, but as though we don't have other tools in our system, in our repertoire. It does make our cycles a little bit longer, but it's all right, because we feel like we're doing justice to what we're doing by keeping our minds open, right? It just doesn't, all that I'm saying is not just within engineering. I think it's helpful to keep our minds open so we embrace more things than a lot of us actually are tuned to doing these days. So that's good to know. That's the thing I want to ask specifically is two things. One is, how much of what you do, and I ask this as an engineer myself, right? So if you're a restaurateur, no matter where you go, you look at things from the perspective of food or service or whatnot. But if you're an engineer, you try to look at every problem as an engineering problem, right? I mean, I talk to a lawyer, I look at an engineering problem. I talk to somebody, I think of an engineering problem. So what you mentioned there, I want to talk about the engineering fast aspect of it. But before I go there, I want to get your take on how much of what you do is art versus science.
No, it's a good combination of both. I've never thought of it that way. I could probably draw some analogies, but look, I think maybe we creatively, the way we kind of explore ideas, is very much driven by art. At least I think of it that way. I have this, when I'm having a conversation, I always like asking the next question. And there's a certain amount of back and forth that comes from a really good conversation. I think we can all think back to, a conversation we had somewhere in the past with somebody, with a family member, with a friend, and just say, that was a very good conversation. There's a certain amount of art in that dance of how that goes, how you build upon what the other person is saying, how you really listen, how it flows. There's art in that. You don't always, the best discoveries aren't the ones that are pre-planned. The best discoveries are, there's where you really develop the idea. And I call those golden coins. when we're having a conversation and, you know, you've heard the same kind of cliches over and over and over. Man, we hate cliches. Well, a golden coin is the opposite of a cliche. A golden coin is you're here, back and forth and developing it and thinking and maybe taking a slightly different perspective and then building on what that other person says. And then they build on yours. And then you just come up with this golden coin of that is something that's really valuable for both of you. I think there's a lot of art in developing those ideas. Now, with that said, my business, you have to have the structure. You have to be able to consistently come up with information, deliver information, classify the information, have people understand what they're expecting to see and hear. And if you don't, it's going to fall flat because people don't always have the time or patience to kind of create the art. So a lot of, and I find, patience in general is short. So a lot of what we do is not art, is kind of structured, is structured delivery. So I think it's a nice combination of both.
Okay, so here's the reason I asked that, right? So as an engineer, if someone told me that business, at the highest level, here's how my mind starts thinking, right? I think of it as a client or a set of clients that are connected to BWG Global have some requirements, they reach out to BWG. And a set of clients who are not currently connected to BWG Global need to have to find a way to reach out to BWG knowing what business you are in. That's a problem, right?
Yeah.
And then the next step is once those clients are there, you get the requirements. You now have to sort of conceptualize what that even means, right? Document it. And if it's MongoDB or it's database related, or if it's Snowflake or Salesforce or CRM or whatnot, you then find a group of people who have those skills. And it's not the same. You're not bringing 10 developers into a meeting from what I've seen, right? It's people
Yeah.
who are doing probably 10 different roles, right? It's people doing different things related to that particular item. So you have to sort of come up with the composition of the people who make up that conversation. And then you reach out to them, you schedule time, they hop on it, you have a conversation, you record it, you make sense out of the conversation, you probably transcribe it, and then you send it out and do these reports. Now that's, to me, an engineering software problem. Right now, which client reaches out to which company? It could be NVIDIA reaching out to BWG Global, or it could be, I don't know, Alphabet reaching out to one of your competitors, for instance, right? And then finally you get this requirement, and then each of you the company has to go out and find people that are in the business of doing this.
Well, Krish, I'll interrupt just because I think that the problem you're solving is too tough a problem. That certainly happens a lot, but I think we realized pretty early you have to syndicate. You have to basically put a stake in the ground and say, you know what, we're going to be very good at database. So what we're going to do is do a monthly panel around database. And that's a good topic right now. We know it's a good topic because it's evolving, it's fundamental. So we go out and build that micro community around database, and we already pre-prescribe. We're already, I know my schedule of database sessions for the next year. I'm going to do them unless I, over the course of the year, decide that they're no longer valuable. Probably a more relevant one for many here is, okay, OpenAI is super interesting. I don't need to wait for somebody to tell me that. So I'm already set a schedule of 12 discussions focused specifically on OpenAI, and Anthropic and software, coding tools and hyperscalers. And, I don't need to wait for a lot of these topics. Now,
Okay.
Once it's set, I may tweak it a little bit. I may say, oh, wait a minute, this is interesting. Small models are actually really coming on. All right, let's shift the topics on the next one to small models. Or, maybe Salesforce does something really interesting. Okay, we're going to go and, lean in a little bit more to our Salesforce coverage. but that's super important. Otherwise, it would just be too difficult to constantly be chasing ad hoc for every discussion. We do about 3,000 sessions a year. So, and I would argue probably 75% of them are already pre-scheduled. But then we want to make room for, breaking news or, emerging topics or changing topics, which we do. The other thing, at least from a BWG perspective, is not all the best research happens in a discussion focus group like this. Some information is needs to be aggregated from a whole customer base. So for that, we use large format survey. I'll go out and I'll survey 100 Amazon customers, and we do about 250 surveys a year. And then other information we found is best done through interviews. So we have a team of probably 60 reporters around the world who go out and interview people. And they use a standard template framework of their questionnaire. And they'll go out and interview probably, here's one example, Lululemon. Our retail group follows Lululemon. So we have reporters who go out and talk to Lululemon managers and standard questionnaire and get their information that way. And then they come back and they take those interview responses and aggregate it into a report. We find that's the best way to get information about what's happening at Lululemon. Not a group discussion, not a large survey, but actual hands-on interview one-on-one. So, different research goals have different requirements and different methodologies, and we combine them all based on the question we're trying to answer.
Greg, everything that you said there obviously makes sense, but on top of that, I think it's art, right? I would put under the bucket of art here, right? Because a lot of that is, you could give that same requirement to 10 different companies, and I bet each one of them is going to do it very differently from the other, right? So therein, BWG has its core competence, right? Your unique selling propositions, your moat, and you're able to do it a certain way that works for your clients, for instance. So
Yes.
That's the art side of things. I want to go to the science side of things. And here's what I mean by that. The reason I try to summarize that earlier, and you added an important point there, which is not just people giving you requirements, but you also have a scheduled set of sessions that you plan out for the next 6 months or a year. Now, a lot of this, how much of this happens? Let me rephrase that. When Greg gets on a call, Greg is human who's moderating this conversation. Christian and other people, say 10 other people on that call are human as well, at least for now. So there's like 10, 11, 12 humans, Homo sapiens, having a conversation. That needs to be done. At least everything that I've been part of is all humans in the call.
Yeah.
Outside of that, everything else that you need to do, whether it's scheduled conversations or a client giving you requirements, finding people, bringing qualified people onto these conversations, transcribing what they're doing. As a developer, as a founder of a company, I can see that there could be a tool that sort of guides every facet of everything you're doing, perhaps but that conversation, which needs to be plugged in. Now, my question to you, the first question, I have a few more, is how much of it today is human driven, and how much of it do you see to be human driven in the next 6 months to a year to 2 years?
It's still a lot of human work. Some of it will certainly move to bots. We're very careful of putting a bot in the middle of a process that's hoping to come up with golden coins. I'm afraid that it's going to disrupt some of that recipe. If you don't if you don't add eggs to the cake, that one missed element could really mess up the whole recipe. But there are certainly things like the cold outreach and the coordination, the scheduling. That's logistics. That's going to bots. The logging, who's joining, who said what. That's bots. Post production and the summaries. That's very easy. That's obviously bots. The distribution of who's actually interested in this topic, that's bots. This person had shown a real interest in NoSQL databases in the past. They should get a copy of this one because it's tagged NoSQL. Okay, that's bots. So I think a lot of those processes are, if they're not AI bots, they're certainly automated, and they'll be automated further. I think what's probably more interesting. So a lot of how much of it? I don't know, man. Maybe half of it has automated steps. Maybe another 10% or more will get more automated steps. What I find interesting is opening the door to things we couldn't do before. So here's the example, and I'll tell you my thinking is we've always been cautious not to make ourselves into a Reuters or a Bloomberg. We just don't have the wherewithal to take that on. But now with AI, I do feel like we can really start to incorporate third-party data, baseline third-party information into our research, and that really opens the door for us because we have a fantastic proprietary data set, but we never, really tried to take all the external data. And if we're talking about Mongo, everything that they said in all of their conferences and, everything that's coming out of their user groups or, download data on the databases or benchmark tests. And if you start to really say, you know what, I'm going to incorporate that whole corpus of data in addition to my proprietary data to come up with, our real spin, our real take above and beyond, it really changes the product, hopefully for the better.
Right. And a few more things to add to what you said there, right? Let's say, in terms of not just automating it, I was just thinking about it as a product, for instance, right? Because to me, what you're doing is an instance of a problem, right? You have conversations, you gather data, but if you extrapolate that to, let's say you said you have, say, N number of conversations per year, but the more automation there is, that N can become 2N or 3N or
Sure.
N to the power of something else, for instance, right? Because with
Yes.
humans in the mix, it cannot scale to the extent. And even things like this, Greg, for instance, I'm just curious. Let's say I've been on a lot of these calls across a variety of different topics, but let's say if I picked one randomly like MongoDB, right? I've been on a number of conversations where we've discussed MongoDB. Some I've contributed to, but a lot of those I've listened in as well. So let's say if you're curious one day, just curious, or maybe there is a reason for that curiosity, and you want to find out, hey, the last 5 years of us inviting Krish to the call, talking
Yeah.
about MongoDB, what has Krish alone has said, not everybody else, but just Krish. If I ask the question today, Greg, is that something that you would have the answer in like 5 minutes, or would that be like a process that kicks off a human workflow where people have to go do a number of things to get the answer to the question?
We can do it. I think we've explored it. It's a great idea. I think that the general idea of how sentiment has changed on a company is very important, especially influential people like yourself, how your sentiment has changed and tracking that. It's actually really straightforward to do, and we do it. What I think we found, though, is group sentiment is probably a little bit, humans are human. And you may have just run into a bug or, dealt with a one-off issue that really changed the variability of your opinion at one point. It's not necessarily the key information unless it's happening at scale, and that requires a lot of data points. So we do track sentiment over time and, across those group forums, and it is absolutely instructive in terms of how customers and partners are feeling about a company is basically your willingness to buy and willingness to promote. Very important. So tracking commentary over time, I love controlled time series data. I think it's probably the best information you can get. So yeah, you've hit on a key point.
So to do that today, Greg, That's kind of a segue to our next topic. To do something like this today, if a client were to come and ask you, hey, what did this person or these people say about this particular topic over the last so many years? You said you're able to answer that question, but are you able to answer that question today using AI relate and AI tools, or are you doing that without using AI?
It needs to be human assisted. Right now, it still needs to be human assisted
And is
because
that
context goes a long way. I can say, here's somebody who might wax poetic about Mongo. And then, if you hear that, somebody might say, wow, this person really likes Mongo. But if you have context to know that the time before and the time before, they were absolutely glowing, and this positive feedback is actually a downtick from where they were before, that context and history matters. Uh, Using AI to do it, to extract sentiment, it certainly can be done, but there's a lot of variability. I think human assisted has gotten better results.
okay? Because to me that's very interesting. From an engineering standpoint, because let's say I said something 5 years ago. One is change in sentiment, but two is whether let's say Krish is more like a politician, where one day he says Mongo is great, the next day he says it's not good. It's not necessarily a change in sentiment, but it's just inconsistency in awareness, possibly
Yeah,
too, right? I just could be ignorant about the topic that I said one thing one day and said a completely different thing the other
yeah,
day. And I'm just imagining that things that you could either not have been able to do prior to AI, or would have taken you a lot of time and money and resources, now becomes an interesting problem, right? I'm just looking at it from an engineering standpoint, because one thing is, okay, how did the sentiment change? Has the speaker been generally consistent, not just in this topic, but across a variety of topics? But of all the things, Greg, one thing that's actually even more interesting to me is, say Krish was on a call talking about Snowflake. He was on a call talking about Mongo. Maybe he was on a call talking about Elastic, right? And he was on a call talking about Oracle, for instance. They are four different topics, sort of, right? They're four different companies, four different products. But there could be a common underlying theme or a tone or a sentiment
yeah,
or a message across those, which to me, I cannot see how a human could even get to the bottom of analyzing that. Because if you have large volumes of data with thousands of conversations with tens of people, it just is not going to scale with a human doing it, and they're going to be error prone, for instance, right? But now with AI in the mix of things, there you have a rich set of data, and now you have to be able to mine the data and find out like phenomenally cool information. And last but not least, have a very presentable way of publishing that information, for instance, right?
yeah.
So in other words, have you considered productizing? Like, in other words, BWG Global does a phenomenal job with services and research and whatnot. I'm just curious, have you ever thought of, hey, you know what we're doing here is really a product, meaning we can use our own product and do what we're doing, but perhaps other people can benefit from this product too, so you could monetize. Is that been something like a thought you've had?
Sure. I think, how do you measure sentiment is pretty important. So the rubric and the definitions of measurement are really important. But certainly, I think so long as it's a group and there's a control and it's time series, measuring group sentiment is super important and valuable if you have the data points. You need a lot of times. Information is just information. It's not data. It's not insight. So you need to make sure you're measuring the right stuff. You're not just capturing noise. A lot of this could fall into the realm of noise. But I think there is something there. There is that kernel, of sentiment across a group that we certainly follow and we do believe is very valuable.
Cool. And then do you, like, I've been in the conversations that are generally in the US, for instance, right? Do you also have these conversations in other parts of the world, in other languages outside of English?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, you do them. Okay. So which means uh, I was just curious, because from an AI standpoint, I'm just wondering whether you could now have people speaking in many different languages, but are essentially being part of the same conversation, right? Somebody's dialing in from, I don't know, from Beijing, talking about DeepSeek or their impact on
Yeah.
Nvidia, for instance, versus somebody else here. So in
You know,
general, sorry,
culture plays a big role, Krish. I think some societies just want to be a lot more polite, and some societies will be a little bit more gruff.
right,
Uh, I think that actually that's why, in some cases, our interview service is effective in getting rid of some of that cultural bias, where you have a standard questionnaire, you have a standard scoring rubric. Um, you can normalize against answers in the prior quarters, and you can basically watch for the trends. You know, in those cases, getting the survey responses in addition to the qualitative voiceover is incredibly valuable. Having matching different data sets to kind of tease out those sentiments.
makes sense. Before we get into the next topic, yeah, last question I have here is what, given everything that you're doing and you've been doing over the years, data, right? You're collecting data from people who have opinions about topics. Uh, AI is coming after a number of things, right? Uh, what is the impact that it has or you expect for it to have on your business, for instance? Like, hey, you know what? Do I need to bring these people to find out what they're thinking, or can I go to an LLM that actually is able to bring this information, right? If a random question such as that. So what do you think is the impact of AI on a business such as yours?
It's going to be transformational. It's already been transformational. It makes average research better. It really commoditizes research. And I think it's training everybody to do research in a whole new way. Whereas you might have engaged with a firm like mine to run a 1 month study, a double blind, you know, type research study. Now you go into GPT and you can ask one prompt, and you get an answer that you're pretty much happy. You say, "Oh, that's good enough. You know what? I'm good." And it was free, and it took 10 seconds.
Right.
Um, that scares me. That scares me a lot. So good enough is going to be good enough for a lot of people. Now, what gives me confidence that BWG, has a long road ahead of it is, uh, you know as well as anybody, proprietary data sets are the determining factor for AI. AI gets one new data point, and it totally will change its opinion entirely.
Right.
So as long as you know that, as long as you stay on the front of that curve, you are incredibly valuable. So we focus on changes, what's changing in sentiment. We focus on what's happening in the last 3 months. We focus on breaking news. And we focus on the hard data that you're not going to read about in the information or one of these standard publications. I want to hear what engineers think about this tool, not just what X company reported that everybody has at their fingertips.
Makes
So
sense.
focusing on the areas that AI doesn't have the data, it's our moat. But there's a lot of good enough information out there that's going to solve a lot of good enough problems for a lot of people.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So the next item we want to talk about, just a complete segue, is stocks, right? I'm
Yes.
wondering, should we have AI coding tools? We're talking AI. It's left to you. Should we talk that and then go to stocks?
Let's go to stocks because I want
Sure.
to. There's a transition here that makes a lot of sense. We've talked a lot about sentiment, and I think it carries over to investing. So look, a lot of our clients are investors, and we can talk about sentiment and we can talk about technology, but a lot of our clients just want to make a buck, and they're measured about just making a buck. And one thing we see is the way that these companies and these stocks trade and are valued really is very similar to the way that these technologies ebb and flow. What I mean is narrative. The narrative around a company is incredibly important to the valuation. And I'll give you a couple obvious examples. I'm going to talk about Palantir for a second, which I think everybody here knows as a stock is one of the most highly valued stocks historically. Uh, I think they're trading maybe 100 times revenue,
400. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, totally.
100 times revenue, which is unfathomable. Now, Palantir is a wonderful company. They have focused on the absolute core pain point of data analytics, and their TAM is huge, and they drive tremendous value, and they're pretty unique in what they do. So, as a company and a solution, it's wonderful. But really, the reason the stock is trading at 100 times is narrative. Narrative. There's this perception of competitive moat. There's this perception of their ability to go after their TAM and a terminal value that's, everyone looks at it and forecasts it out. Companies currently growing north of 40% a year at $4 billion of revenue is pretty amazing. But they have to maintain that for a long time. And the only way anyone knows whether that's going to happen or not, the opinions, is really driven by sentiment. Narrative. The narrative is this company is on the cutting edge of AI, and they're going to be able to continue to break into the enterprise, and they're going to be able to continue to expand their use cases so that they can continue to grow at these kind of 40% top line growth rates. That's narrative. On the flip side, so if you believe that and you buy into that narrative, you can get yourself around to thinking that 100 times revenue is not crazy. On the flip side, look at a company like Adobe. Adobe, they're still the mainstay platform for creative artists to create digital assets and art. And they are the standard that's used by virtually every agency and every company around the world as the must-have creative platform. And they've been trying, albeit not so successfully, to really be on the forefront of leveraging AI to transform how that creative process works. Now, the narrative for Adobe is just about opposite of Palantir. The narrative around Adobe is they're going to get crushed by AI. And you look at what's happening with Midjourney and Sora, DALL-E, and with a snap of a finger, you can create a digital asset, and that's just going to get easier and easier and easier. And therefore, graphic designers don't need to spend $1,000 a year for an Adobe license. The narrative around Adobe is that they're growing 10%. They're valued at, I think it's 6 times sales. And the reason that their multiple is so bad is because the narrative is that they're going to get crushed, just going to face increasing pressure. At least the way I think about BWG is we take the sentiment from customers and partners, and we try and inform that narrative. Maybe Adobe has more of a competitive moat than the consensus view says, and maybe Palantir doesn't quite have the competitive moat that everyone presumes. So a lot of what we do is try and match those two the narrative of investors versus the sentiment of customers and partners. Anyway, I just saw that analogy, so I wanted to jump right in there.
I think it is interesting, right? Because you mentioned two companies. I'll take one in a different industry, for instance. Probably mentioned this to you, Greg. Our next API is going to be in the fintech space. So we have actually taken time to spending time in the market, right? Something we've never done before as a company, right? It's not like we want to solve a manufactured problem. Everything we've built so far is problems we've run into. We didn't find a solution, so we built it. So last 3 to 6 months, I've been spending a lot of time in the stock market, right? And it's amazing how when you do something part time versus when you do something almost full time,
Yeah.
people don't appreciate the magnitude of the difference, right? It's not even the same. I remember listening to this on NPR like 15 years ago when someone called in and saying, "Hey, I've been trying to build this for a long time and nothing seems to work." And then the post of the call, you know, he said there's one thing that you probably are doing wrong is, are you doing this part time or full time? And the
Yeah.
caller goes, part time. He goes, no, you're never going to get anything out there if you're doing it part time. And I can speak to this from direct experience of trying to build what we built 7 years ago, 8 years ago, when we started trying to do it part time. We kept doing things. We never went live, right? We went live in 2019, a year after I quit everything else that I was doing, right? And I say this, hopefully it helps somebody who's listening in. If you got to do it full time. So last 3 months, maybe more, we've been spending time in the stock market, literally watching the chart, right? Feeling the pain of it from 9:30 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon, and sometimes till 8 in the evening as well, right? To get
Yeah.
digest the problem. And I initially thought that's only going to help us with the next product or the API that we're building. As it turns out, it did a little bit more. Sure, it took away time that I would have otherwise spent coding to something else, which is a pain. But outside of that, it actually is helping us make decisions on technologies that we would have done otherwise. As a developer or as an architect, you don't have a title when you run a company, but you go with your previous experience or you look for what makes most sense today, like if it's vector databases versus, would I go with Mongo that has vector support and Postgres that has vector support, or would I go with Pinecone or VB8 that actually is built for vector, right? That's just an
Right.
engineering decision. But when you're in the market, stock market, I recognize that that is impacting our decisions, right? When Oracle was doing differently 3 months ago, not that we use that actually, but regardless, we would have felt differently about using some of their products, for instance, right? But now, last 3 months of every analyst saying that Oracle is going to only go upwards and they've dropped like 35%. Sure, you're like, you know what? But Oracle is not a great example because it's a great company. I used to work there years ago. But if you took a smaller company, you're worried about there's an existential crisis possibly, right, Greg? Because,
Yeah.
a lot of these AI companies in my mind may not even exist or be around 3 years. So you have to be careful about who you're actually buying into. So that takes me to the one of the other things you mentioned, which is lock-ins, right? Now, historically, at Snowpal or otherwise, I've never been a proponent of being logged into a vendor, whether it's AWS or Azure or cloud or this or that. We want to have the flexibility of using different tools and technologies that make the most sense to us, but that also means that you need more skills in the team and whatnot. Other companies I know prefer being completely all out, and because I went to the AWS summit and I talked to people there, it's almost like they breathe AWS. They would not use Google Cloud, like Azure or Google Cloud, even if there was a competing product that was a 10 times better and a 15 times cheaper, because they are just an AWS shop, for instance,
Yeah.
right? What are your thoughts on lock-in from your experience talking to people? How would you go about it?
Well, are you a startup or are you JP Morgan? So it really depends on your risk tolerance and what you're trying to achieve. But generally speaking, I think there's probably more benefits of picking a horse. I think hopefully you pick the right horse. Picking the wrong horse could be very damaging, as you're saying. But if you pick a safe horse and you pick a horse, you're probably going to maximize your skills of your team. You're going to be able to maximize all the different features of the products. If you pick a good one like the Microsoft stack, you don't necessarily have to deal with all the integrations and all the challenges there. You can leave it to Microsoft to integrate the applications with the infrastructure. Um, I do think it's nice to be able to hedge your bets, and I hear a lot of people doing the 80-20 rule. I'm going to go 80% with my my partner of choice, my horse. But I'll hedge a little bit. So in some areas maybe that are developing a little faster, or some areas where perhaps this vendor doesn't quite have the best skills. But I kind of believe that there's probably more benefits of being 80% locked in rather than really trying to hedge yourself constantly. I feel like you're going to be in constant assessment paralysis if you really do try and balance what everyone is doing instead of doing what you're supposed to be doing, which is working on your own value prop. Let Micros just pick Azure, move on, and focus all of your time and energy on features and differentiation.
I think that's great advice. And I say this because, despite the fact that we don't have vendor lock-ins, I know, when you talk about ODBC from years ago, like open database connectivity and whatnot, where you build systems where you could actually flip the database, like by just literally plug it out and plug a new one in. In my career, spanning 20 plus years, Greg, and building software every single day of that career, I've never, either personally for us at Snowpal or for a client, ever seen a situation where they actually replaced something that's with something else that was comparable, right? I've never ever seen that, not one time,
Yes.
despite spending a lot of time and money. Like, I've had people tell me years ago when we were using Oracle databases, hey, you know what? Let's just stick to ANSI SQL and not go with the Oracle's analytical functions. I'm like, it doesn't make any sense. You used to pay like $250,000 per core to buy or to license Oracle, and you're not going to use all of those features because you have this opinion that you might one day change the database, which never ever happens, right?
Right.
So I think that is this engineering decision versus a developer and architecture decision, right? So I completely agree. There's a couple of other things I want to talk to you about, but I know we hit the top of the hour. How much time do you have left?
I'm good. Why
Okay.
don't we go another 15 minutes?
Okay. And anytime you want to call it wraps, let me know, right? I can go
You got
on
it.
and on and on. Yeah. Our record has been like 3 hours, 30 minutes with one of the founders who came to the podcast. Yeah, so the next
I don't
item
see what we're
here.
doing in 15 minutes. We want to go another 15 beyond that? That's fine.
Okay, cool. I want to go with, and then I want to give you 10 minutes if you have any questions for me after we end my part of your interview. So you're
Sure.
welcome to ask me if there's something you want to ask me as well. So the next thing is AI coding tools. And you mentioned that AI tools have made coding cheap. Applications can be built faster,
Yeah.
cheaper, perhaps even better. I have a few questions, but I'll let you sort of kick us off there saying, what is your experience? What are you hearing? What are we expecting to see in the next 6 months to a year or more?
Yeah. Look, one of the big questions that investors are trying to figure out is how AI is going to transform enterprise software. And for the most part, you look at this year, I think the bet has been that enterprise software is in trouble. That's the consensus. You look at a stock like ServiceNow, we talked
Or
about Adobe.
Salesforce, yeah.
These companies, you look at their stocks, they're basically flat or down. Enterprise software has been arguably a terrible investment category this year because of the narrative. The narrative is these companies are in trouble. And you and I have talked about this to a certain extent. I actually see the challenge. This AI is going to introduce a new architecture that's going to enable new capabilities for enterprise software. That's going to be really exciting, and a lot of workflows that may have been more difficult are going to become much easier with kind of a data lake architecture that AI pulls from. So I do see some of that. And you can see OpenAI, I do a lot of conversations with companies about it's a simple question. What are you investing in? That's like, I don't even know how many words that is. What are you investing in? 5 words. I can start a 2-hour conversation with that. What are you investing in? If I ask an enterprise architect, what are you investing in? This year, a lot of people are saying, you know what, I'm going to give OpenAI for business a shot. I'm going to try it. And we've seen Google Gemini make real headway into the enterprise in a way that Google has never. And then Cohere and all the open source models. It's been remarkable how many companies are trying kind of non-brand name AI software. So if you're Adobe or Salesforce or ServiceNow or Workday, that's concerning. That's investment dollars that should have gone to a new module of Workday that instead that development team and IT team is spending time, trying to figure out OpenAI for business. And I think for the most part, those new tools have been successful, which is even scarier for these companies because here is a true net new function that the employees find magical, and there's very little back-end integration, so it's deployed very quickly, and it's really productive, and it's cheap. That's the other thing. This isn't costing you, $5 million to deploy. It's basically consumption-based or, introductory licensing or VC, cheap VC money. So these things are cheap. Scares the bejesus out of enterprise software companies. But so as I think about it, this question is still lingering. What does AI mean for enterprise software companies? I want to set a little more context because these companies are not standing still. You could argue they're being incredibly aggressive, rallying all their resources to be right in front and center of this. Let's go to Salesforce is probably the best example because they've gone so far as to consider renaming the company. They've put everybody on Agentforce. They've redirected all their sales teams, all their sales incentives and promotions around Agentforce. They've acquired Informatica, as well as a number of other supporting tools. They've basically pushed the entire organization to this, and it hasn't worked, or it hasn't transformed. It hasn't grown the way OpenAI is growing in the enterprise. And there's a question, why not? I'm sure you'd probably have a sense of why not. My sense of why not is, well, OpenAI is a single tool. It's a fantastic single tool that's being made available to everybody. Salesforce, with their Agentforce, is trying to solve unique workflows based on proprietary data for each company. It's a much harder problem. Oh, and they're taking roles and responsibilities and trying to change the workflow, which is super hard. I mean, like it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. People don't like to do new things for the most part. They think, well, the old one, I was more comfortable doing it that way. So I think Salesforce's task, an enterprise software company's task of transforming their workflows is much, much, much harder than somebody just coming in with a whole new workflow. Which is why I think we've seen I call them the de novo AI companies. The de novo AI companies have had much more success. Now, does this mean enterprise software companies are in a lot of trouble? Well, they're in some trouble, but I think the scope of what's really possible with an agnostic tool is fairly limited because chat interface is only good for certain types of workflow. AI query and retrieval is only good for certain types of enterprise workflow. And then there are lots of other forms of lock-in outside of proprietary data, all the various integrations, the training and employee behavior, not even to mention contractual. There's a lot more that a company needs to do to operate beyond what can happen out of a chat interface. And if you're talking about, look at the interface of Salesforce or Epic. You want to know how locked in these companies are. Talk to a nurse practitioner about intaking a new patient. They probably have literally 100 data points they need to collect on a patient. and it's just not efficient to take that in. There may be new ways of voice, but to do it structured in a structured way, I'm not sure you're going to do better than a form. Now, maybe you can voice into the form to do it more efficiently, but to verify each response with a nurse practitioner, recognizing that that was appropriate response, I think these companies have a long way to go. The OpenAI and Google have a long way to go before they can replace these established workflows. Plus, if these enterprise software companies really innovate the way I think they want to innovate, and we hope they'll innovate, they will start incorporating AI at the steps of the workflow to really improve the overall process. Not every process can just be replaced with a whole new process. So actually, I think there are actually legs here for these companies, and the narrative that they're dead is probably overstated. So that's some of my
Yep.
thinking.
Great points. The pace at which research, implementation, and changes happen in a lot of these hyperscalers, Greg, personally, I don't think it's a reflection of, by any stretch of the imagination, a reflection of how fast things happen in other organizations. I'm not talking like slow moving bureaucratic organizations that are generally red tape centric, even ones that are fairly efficient, right? I'm not saying at the level of startups because you don't have enough money or people, so we have no choice but to be more efficient sometimes. But even companies that are generally good companies, let's put it that way, right? Maybe not the Meta or the Alphabet or whatever, but good software companies, the pace at which changes happen at these large, really large hyperscalers, do you see that? It's my opinion that the pace at which the same type of changes can happen in other organizations is not going to be anywhere close. So on one side, we're looking and reading and hearing things about AI making changes happening at a rapid pace, and on the other side of the spectrum, I see that a lot of the world is still completely caught behind. I'm not going to go up to like something like Micro Center, which the last time I was there, is one of those Best Buy like places, right? And I don't know if it's national, but we have one in our area. They, it's a kid. I think it's a college kid. I was talking to him for, I don't know, for a few minutes. They cannot use the mouse because they have systems like DOS operated systems where you can only use the keyboard, right? That's where Micro Center was the last time I was there, and there's a lot of people at Micro Center, right? And this is in the US. I'm not talking this is in some other country where there's nothing's happening.
Yeah.
And this is in the DC metro where Jensen Huang is here like 3 times a week, I think, in the White House or something, right? So, what is your take on what we are hearing and reading about AI and how things are rapidly changing versus the reality on the ground and people adapting to it? People maybe in the business of engineering or maybe outside the business of engineering, maybe small companies, mid-sized companies, startups, or non-engineering companies and regular people adapting to AI or being completely oblivious to what's happening. Is there a complete disconnect between the two?
No, I'll tell you, I feel like everybody wants to use AI. Everybody. Whether they can, whether it makes sense is a different story. But I think everybody wants to use AI. Anybody who's played with ChatGPT or maybe their grandkids showed it to them, everybody's amazed by it. And I think that the perception is it's the future has, I think, touched everybody. So here's an example. We do focus groups with trades businesses. These are HVAC, heating and cooling, plumbing, electricians, painters. I think their interest in automating their business is probably one of their top priorities. These are trades businesses where you have to go in and unclog a sink or paint the side of a house. Well, I think they know that they have this perception that these tools will help them with better scheduling, better marketing, better dispatch, better accounting, better customer follow-up and support, better, billings, better receivable recovery. And I think they probably have a lot to gain from it. So I think that businesses can't. Now, the question then is, how much can it really help? If you're a mom and pop plumbing operation with one crew, how much can that automation really, really help you? Well, you think about each task. Marketing, can it help you with marketing? Certainly. Sure. Help me get my name out on social media. Those tools are out there and they just need to be used. Help me schedule my crew better. My guess is probably not all that much. One crew, they're probably doing a pretty good job. Help me, you know what I'm saying. Pricing. How
Yeah.
about pricing intelligence?
No, but Greg, the question I have for you there is, sorry, but the question I have for you there is it not barking up the wrong tree? Because if I am an HVAC business, to me, my whole business, there is an existential crisis, and here is why I say that. A lot of the plumbing companies, let's say I call them home, I have no idea, so they almost always overcharge me because they say, you know what, I'm going to take an hour to diagnose it, and then I'm going to take another hour to fix it. Now, with tools that are available, I can go find out or at least believe that this is kind of what the problem is. So they wouldn't even be able to charge me for the first hour of the diagnosis. So to me, before they start automating their systems, they have bigger fish to fry, right? To me, that's my concern, where companies are sometimes spending money. Because the other day, I'll just end this topic with this last example here. I had somebody on the podcast where he said he was a non-technical person, but he's working with a tech company. He gave me a great example of something somebody did using AI. They invested some money and they were able to get that done. They were able to solve the problem better. Funny thing is, I asked him, hey, I could have done all of that without spending a dime on AI, literally, right? In other words, to me, the concern is just because it's cool, just because you're becoming dated by not doing it. I feel like a lot of companies and organizations are, to find out which part of what systems you have need to be automated and AI needs to play a role is not a trivial task, right, Greg? It's a complex process. So to me, I'm curious. The question I have is, I've seen more than one occasion where people have told me, hey, I've invested this, done these, bought these tools, and now I'm doing this better. And my eyebrows go up because I'm like, you know what, you could have done all of this without everything that you're stating right there. Maybe someone made a convincing case that you have to spend that money. So maybe only time has to tell as to where, I don't know, like Meta is spending like $100 billion, right, on these data centers. And one of the things they said they're doing is improving your engagement on Reels. And I've spent a fair bit of time the last 3 weeks on Reels for more than one reason, I'll tell you. The algorithm is so abysmally poor. And this is from Meta, right? I'm watching Reels. I watch something for 30 seconds or 1 minute. For the next 15 minutes, it just dishes out the same type of content. I mean, like, you need AI for this? You shouldn't need AI for this, right? I mean, the dumbest piece of software could do that.
Look, I would say, I do think there is an opportunity for efficiency in a lot of places. You take a plumber who's not doing any kind of automated customer engagement. Hey, our tech is going to be there in an hour. Please confirm that you're actually at the house. Those kind of tools. That's not it. That's, maybe there's AI at Twilio that's helping automate that, but turning those things on, there are a lot of businesses that can turn on that kind of automation step that will make a big difference. I do agree they're diminishing returns. I do think that they're what is the thing that's probably going to have the best return on investment? Certainly good questions. But I see AI making everyone a lot more efficient, and I see competition everywhere ramping up. everywhere. Plumbers are going to get, once every plumber has, the baseline of course I have online scheduling, and of course I have, I'll be there at 2:30, or please confirm you're going to be there at 2:30. That's a big improvement. That's a very big improvement. What's the next step? And is the next step going to have the same ROI as that one that doesn't leave your tech stranded, and so that he's doing 3 calls a day instead of 5? Maybe not. But I do think there is still a lot of low hanging fruit out there.
Very well said. So, Greg, as we come to the end of our conversation, before I ask you one or two final questions, do you have any questions for me?
Well, Krish, this is a little different because I ask you questions all the time. You know, I understand what you're building at Snowpal and your APIs. We talked about data architectures. Yeah, you know what? I'd like to turn to you with the question on AI and how different you see application design becoming. Do you see a big transformation coming here to enterprise apps, or is it really innovating at the edge rather than at the core?
Great question, Greg. I think software development, software engineering is a space where things were not static necessarily, right? Things were always moving. Because I have friends who are in, not that I know anything about mechanical or chemical engineering, but I have friends in manufacturing who, I could be wrong, but based on my conversations with them over the years, I felt like they didn't have to keep on top of things as much as some of us in engineering companies, software engineering companies had to, right? Because JavaScript frameworks changed every 3 weeks, regardless whether you liked it or not. So
Yeah.
the pace of change was always rapid. But now it's a different kind of rapid, right? It's exponential. I think this is an inflection point, right? From engineering, mostly from an architectural standpoint, Greg, I think software architecture is not going to look anything like how it's looked in the last 20 years. Like completely. I strongly believe it's going to be 180 degrees different. Anytime we end up doing something that I feel like I'm doing it the same way I did last year, it freaks the heck out of me, right? And I stopped
Yeah.
doing it, right? Which is why we've taken a breather from some of the things we're doing because we want to digest what's happening. And I could be wrong, but my hunch, and I strongly believe when I say this, that if you are building something today, you're architecting an application today, it doesn't matter what you're architecting, right? Whether it's on the server side, microservices, front and back end, middleware, language agnostic, technology agnostic, you're going to have to do it very, very differently from how you've done it before. The problem is when I talk to people, I'm not seeing that happen, right? People are reading about AI, people are using ChatGPT, people are using a number of these tools. I'm talking developers, right? Not non-engineers and non-developers. But when you try to dig into how it is, how are they using these tools at work, or how are they doing things differently for their clients based on all the changes that have happened and transpired, the answer becomes rather vague, right? I'm not getting the specificities around it. In other words,
Yeah.
I'm looking for a very specific answer saying, hey, here is our tech stack, here is how it looked, here is how it's changing in the interim, here is where we see it in the next 6 months to a year or 2 years, right? I'm not necessarily seeing that clarity, and it just could be the people I've spoken to, right? Doesn't mean it's just a small focus group. So I think there are going to be a lot of mistakes to be made by companies in the next year or two. I would be perplexed because even if you change one JavaScript framework with another, we all make mistakes, right? It's just human.
Yeah.
Now with AI and all the the options that are available out there, it's absolutely overwhelming. I can tell you that I've never felt this overwhelmed as a developer ever in my career, and I've never done stale, obsolete, outdated stuff, right? I mean, I'm being honest here. This has been very interesting and challenging and scary at the same time because as a startup, you don't want to pick the wrong tool, like you mentioned, right? Wrong company, and then they don't exist in 6 months, you're screwed. Like, I mean, you have no options, right? So the smaller you are as a company, the more careful you have to be. But at the same time, the thing that's very exciting, Greg, is people always say, you know what? Oh, AI is there. You don't need developers anymore, yada, 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 right? The funny thing is, sure, AI is going to reduce the need for developers. I mean, I don't argue. I mean, that is the truth. But you see the flip side of this. developers don't need other roles in the team. Not enough conversation is being had around it. In other words, if Krish has two other developers in the company, right? We didn't have a product manager, or say we didn't have a UI designer, UX designer, or a tester, or a scrum master, or everyone else who's in the company.
Yeah.
I think, in my opinion, and it could be biased because I'm a developer, I think it's a whole lot easier to replace these other roles because of AI than it is to replace developers with AI. So people, every time they come and ask me, they're like, oh my God, what are you going to do? I'm like, you know what? I don't know what I'm going to do, but there's a lot more people who also have to worry about what they are going to do or not going to do.
Oh,
Right? Yeah.
no, it's
So
all
that's
changing.
it's
It's all
that's my
changing.
yeah, my 2 cents around it, right? But I think I'm in the school of thought that if Mark Zuckerberg is spending $100 billion, sure, he's been spending $5 billion a quarter on Reality Labs, and it's just his fun project that's been not turning any revenue. You want to err on the side of these smart people, right? I personally want to err on the side of Dr. Lisa Su or Jensen Huang or Mark Zuckerberg or Sundar Pichai or Nadella than err on the side of the analysts on Wall Street or skeptics of AI, right? Now, I don't know who's going to be right or wrong like a year or two down the road, but I would rather be wrong by trusting the people who are in the business that you are also in, sort of, right? We're building software, they're building software, they're there. So I don't know. I'm super stoked about this because, personally speaking, Greg, I've been building software for like 20 some years. If AI came into the mix of things 20 years later, I would have been watching it as from the sidelines. You know what I mean, right?
Right.
That's terrible. When people tell me they're scared of AI, I'm like, you know what? You should be happy because this thing could have happened 20 years later or whatever, whenever you would have retired, 25 years later. And you'd have been watching, like you're sitting on the bus and watching the landscapes change. But now you have the opportunity to use it, right? Make a
Yeah.
difference, make an impact. So for everyone who's out there worried about it, I'd say you should be worried if you want to sit out or you're paranoid or you don't want to agree that this is going to change the way you live life. But otherwise, I think it's a time to be excited, time to be.
I
Yeah.
fully agree. Like we have the opportunity to we know the change is right here. We all have the opportunity to use this and to take some shots. It's commoditizing. It's making it much more approachable, making it much more accessible, but to us too. So we can take a shot. I think it's an exciting time. Yeah.
Perfect, right? I have one question I ask of all my guests, which is about food. But before I go there, the last question to you is, do you want to answer a geopolitical question? It's left to you. It's just a random question I have.
Given, I mean, let's see what it is. Sure.
Okay. Here is the question, right? And it's a genuine question out of curiosity. So AI, we've talked about it quite a bit, and we're going to continue talking about it, right? NVIDIA, the largest company in the world, GPUs, Alphabet's done very well with collaborating with Broadcom with the non-GPU chips like ASIC, the parallel chips that they are building. So there's a lot of people. Amazon's doing its own stuff, but Google's making a big difference, right? All of that is happening. But from the little I know, the company that creates the machines to make these chips is called, I believe, ASML, right? Based out of
I've
Netherlands.
got a dog barking right behind me. Can you
Oh,
I want to make
yeah,
sure I'm hearing the
no, yeah,
question.
no worries. The company that makes the machines that create the chips, right? Where the chips are, that's ASML, if I'm not wrong.
Yep.
They are based out of Netherlands, right?
Okay.
And the company that makes the chips, purchasing the machines from ASML and produces the chips for NVIDIA or for Alphabet or whatever, from what I can tell, is Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing,
Right.
TSMC, right?
Yep.
They are located in Taiwan, right?
Yep.
So it's a beautiful country, but it's an interesting country as well for reasons we know, right? Taiwan's a very important country. It's now as America, as the US, we are leading this front on AI, right? And China is very much there. I would say the two countries that are making all of the difference, I would say, are US and China. Sorry if you're living anywhere else in the world. I'm sure you make a difference, but these two countries are lock, stock, and barrel in that, in that space of pioneering AI.
Right.
But all of the chips that we need for companies that are located here, headquartered here, like NVIDIA and and Broadcom and Alphabet, they're manufactured in Taiwan, right? And now you're talking about AI independence and AI sovereignty and whatnot.
Yeah.
Now China has an interest in Taiwan, right? It's one China, and we all know what it means there. If in the event, say China, it is not a simple question, but I want to throw it right there.
It's a
In the
six-parter.
event, in the event that China attacks Taiwan,
Yeah.
where every chip is being made, I mean, when you invest in the stock market, we talked about stock market, we talked about AI. Greg, I want to bring this together when we end this call. Does hell break loose, or do we not worry about does like if China were to attack Taiwan, where TSMC is located as a company, which is $1.5 trillion
Yeah.
hyperscaler, right? Every chip that Nvidia is buying, as far as I know, is coming from there. Every chip
Yeah.
that Broadcom is buying is coming from there. You don't have access to chips anymore. What happens? I mean, when you invest in the market, when you invest in these technologies, should we be oblivious to things that are outside our control at that geopolitical level? Or do you keep that at the back of your mind when you make some of these decisions? That's my question.
Okay. So that's a simple question. I'm glad
Oh
you
my
gave me a
God.
softball here at the end.
What was that?
No, it's a very complicated question.
Yeah.
Very
I'm
complicated.
sorry, I didn't catch that. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Sorry,
Okay.
I'm not communicating the irony there. Boy, and it's not something I think deeply about. So I'm not sure I have the greatest insight, but I'll share my opinion for what it's worth if you're willing to listen.
Sure.
Um, First, I'd say is a lot of this has to do with you can only control the things you can control, right? Yes, there is an existential threat of China invading Taiwan and shutting off chip access to the West. That's a real threat. And it's one of the key reasons why, if you look at Intel's generations behind. It's one of the reasons their stock has done so well this year, because the narrative of the U.S. requiring a national chip making infrastructure or plant is valuable, and I think that the Trump administration has made that known. They've known their willingness to support that. So Intel, a company that arguably really doesn't have the roadmap that they need to have, is valued so much better because of this thought that, well, who's going to benefit? Now, a couple other thoughts I have. TSMC is valuable because they have the technology, unique technology, but also there's a market to purchase it. So what I've thought about here in Taiwan is, if Taiwan becomes controlled by China and the US and Western countries decide, or China decides, you know what, we're going to limit your access to advanced semiconductors, you're basically getting rid of your customers. And it's a two-way road. You not only need the best manufacturers, you also need customers willing to buy it. So I would argue that if that were to happen, let's just play that scenario forward. China attacks Taiwan, and let's just say, it's not a devastating, world war, which it could very well erupt into. And just snap your fingers, and the day later, Taiwan is controlled by China, and the U.S. access to advanced semiconductors is controlled or reduced or shut off entirely. Well, what happens 10 years after that? My argument would be 10 years after that, we would find an alternative source. And TSMC may be the world's best on this node, but 10 years later, customers who demand and are willing to pay for the most advanced nodes will be forced to create an alternative source.
I think
That's
that's a very fair answer.
yeah.
Thanks, Greg. The last question is, what is your favorite food?
My favorite food.
Yeah.
I like a lot of food.
No,
I
you got
like
to
a
pick
lot of.
one dish.
I
Like
only
if
get
that's your
one.
comfort food, one thing, just one thing you want to. That's one thing you like to eat all the time, or if you have to pick
One.
one dish.
I'll tell you what. I mean, my wife's a nutritionist, so we eat healthy. But uh, but if I get a choice, I'll tell you, Chinese food is great. Chinese food is delicious.
Okay, not the
So
cuisine. Pick one item though. One dish.
how about roast pork lo mein?
I
I'm going
understand
to
the
go with
low.
roast pork. It's not something I'm going to eat every day, but in terms of a bite, that's a really tasty bite.
Wow, I've not even. I'm vegetarian, but I've even not even seen that. You said roast pork.
Lo mein, lo mein,
Lo mein.
Chinese noodles with roast pork.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. My wife is Indian, but she's from Malaysia. So we eat. She cooks a lot of Chinese in the house, and we eat a lot of Chinese outside. That's
Yeah.
our favorite cuisine as well. So amazing. Before I end, any closing comments, Greg?
No, I just want to thank you. I mean, yes. So yes, thank you very much for having me on. This was a lot of fun. It was very easy. You said it was going to go fast. It went fast, and I can think of all the things that you and I planned to talk about that we didn't talk about. So maybe that's for our next podcast.
Absolutely. And again, folks, just a reintroduction. And Greg, I'll include the link to your LinkedIn profile and the
Thank you.
company. But if there's other links you want for us to include, just let me know, and I can include it. We can include
Yeah,
it in the
please come
podcast
to
as well.
BWG Global. Check out our panels, and we'd love to have you. So
Yeah,
thank you for this,
and
Bruce.
definitely, I'm gonna. So again, folks, Greg Irwin, the co-founder of BWG Global, and Greg is no stranger to me. As I mentioned, I've been on a lot of these calls, and it's a lot of fun. And Greg's got a great voice, and everybody else also has a great voice. So it's very calm and soothing. So no matter
Good.
what the topic is, even the way when you said if China were to attack Taiwan, I've not heard that in that cool, composed voice ever. That statement from anybody.
You, you're kind,
I'm
Krish.
yeah.
Well, look, you're doing great things at Snowpal. Your podcasts, I've loved them. I got the chance to listen to a couple on break. You're doing great things. So thank you.
Thank you so
I
much, Greg.
appreciate you
Really,
as part of the community.
oh no, thank you so much. Folks, until next time, talk soon. Bye bye.
Bye bye.